One man. Goodbye. Hello, Heisman.
20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, 45. There goes Davis. Oh, my God. Davis is going to run it all the way back. Auburn's going to win the football game.
They give it back now to the 30. They're down to the 20. All the Vegas is out on the field. He's going to go into the end zone.
Four-man Alabama rush. Got him. No, they didn't. Oh, my gracious. How about that?
3 games left. That's all that stands between us and the long, cold, dark offseason of 2025. But guys, it's not here yet. We've got 2 semifinal games to talk about. We've got a national championship somewhere down the line, way too far into January for my liking, but it is what it is. We're here to talk the semifinals, the Orange Bowl and the Cotton Bowl here on the 3 Technique, a college football podcast at the intersection of the X's and O's and the Jimmies and the Joes. This episode, all episodes brought to you by our friends at homefieldapparel.com. Along with Trey Reeves, Garrett Turney, I'm Mitch Mason. Glad to have you hanging out with us. Fellas, we broke down, at least Trey and I, broke down the quarterfinals in the last episode. And with Penn State and Notre Dame sitting and getting ready to play first in the Orange Bowl on January 9th, the Cotton Bowl playing on January 10th, Texas and Ohio State, there may be a bunch of snow on the ground for that one. I just wanted to pitch right off the top. What are you most excited for in these semifinal games?
I think it's going to be 2 different clashing styles of football games. I'm really interested to see how both of those play out. I think we're going to see a lot of offense, hopefully in the Cotton Bowl, a lot of defense in the Orange Bowl. And it'll be really interesting to see how all 4 of these coaches navigate those different styles of games. I think at least, I think we'll get at least one really close game. I'll save which one I think is maybe not going to be as close or more at risk of not being close for the actual prediction. But yeah, really different contrasting styles of game. It'll be interesting to see how those are managed.
I was going to say, I think the big thing that I'm looking at here is just it should be a very competitive set of games here, right? I think the teams that are left all match up, I think, really well against each other. A lot of really good defenses, a lot of teams that should be able to put good defensive products on the field. And so it should be fun to kind of watch how these teams try to navigate that. And hopefully we see kind of a close, very competitive set of 3 games here at the end of the season, as opposed to some of the games that have been a little less competitive and a little bit less watchable, I suppose would be the way to watch there, to say that from, some of the previous games so far.
I think creativity is my buzzword for these last 2 games. And I wrote about it a little bit over on our Substack. We'll talk and break that down as we get into the 2 games, but I'm excited to see which coaching staff embraces the moment. There's so much film on their team from the longest season in college football history to this point. And like we saw with Marcus Freeman, which team is going to have that extra little bit of flair, that X factor that they gain by putting it on the line, by doing something risky, doing something calculated, and if they can execute it, it may pay off in a big, big way. So excited to break these 2 games down. Really quickly, though, did want to shout out ServPro First Responder Bowl. That was a blast to be at. Texas State won a classic over North Texas. Shout out, though, Drew Mestemaker. Hadn't made a start since he was 14 years old, and the kid absolutely balls out, nearly 400 yards passing, brought North Texas almost all the way back. I mentioned Texas State wins back-to-back bowl games in an absolute thriller, but that was a good one to be at. Shout out to SMU and ServPro First Responder Bowl for having us out. It was a good time. I guess real fast before we get into the breakdowns, is there one bowl game that's been memorable for you guys that's just kind of made this bowl season worth it?
Man, there's so many, right? We had the Hawaii Bowl on Christmas Eve. We had the Game Above Sports Bowl that went to 6 overtimes. We don't have to talk about the Las Vegas Bowl. Nothing happened in that one.
No. They didn't play that one, right? They just
opted out. Bowl?
I think it got canceled, actually. Yeah,
I think so.
No, I mean, it's been a really fun bowl season. We haven't really got a chance to talk about it on the podcast because playoffs going on and transfer portal and all this other stuff. But man, we'll have to do like a retrospective episode maybe, or a segment later on, because it's been really fun. It seems like there's been way more closer games than in years past.
Mm-hmm. Well, and Trey, to briefly touch on it with that Vegas Bowl, it was the unfortunate casualty of, once again, the birthday curse for me. One thing that's fun to watch is anytime the Aggies are playing a bowl game that happens on the 28th of December, the day of my birth, with the exception of the actual day of my birth, the Aggies have not won a bowl game on my birthday since then, back in '95, when it was a win over, I think it was Michigan, like the Alamo Bowl or something like that. But outside of that, speaking of Michigan, though, that was the one that I thought was super fun to watch. This, not so much from a quality football standpoint. It wasn't a whole lot of quality football getting played in that game against Bama, but man, to watch the absolute meltdown from Jalen Milroe and the Alabama offense early in that game, when it was, pouring rain coming down in sheets. But to watch that meltdown with like 3 or 4 possessions with a turnover in a row, and it resulted in like 2 points, I think, for Michigan, because they just can't score. But to watch all of that go down, I could hear the Bama fans, giving excuses and, it's the rain. Of course it was going to be. Then it cleared up nice and good, and they still couldn't do very much for the rest of the game. So that was kind of a fun one, and I'm curious to see how those two programs project out. Coming off of year ones with their new head coaches, a lot of people leaving from those programs. Really curious to see, I guess, how both of those programs go from here.
Yeah, Michigan bringing in a lot of players, Alabama losing a lot of players in the transfer portal right now. Trey, you mentioned it. We will do a kind of what we learned from bowl season episode here after the national championship. But curious just to hear what stuck out to y'all. I think I agree with all of those. So without further ado, gentlemen, let's get to it. The national semifinals await, and I'm excited about as excited about this semifinal, if not more so, than I have been really, I think, since the very first national semifinal. It felt like there was some sort of controversy or maybe a shade of disrespect, I think, to teams that didn't make the semifinal in the 4-team era. It always, in my mind, was kind of presented with an asterisk. Yeah, these 4 teams are here, but shouldn't there have been at least 2 others playing for the right to be on this stage? But this year, we've been able to settle it on the field, and we've got 4 teams that have not won a championship since 2014. Ohio State was the last team to do that in the first ever 4-team college football playoff. Texas hasn't done it since the BCS days, and Penn State and Notre Dame, as I wrote in my article, they haven't done it since the late 80s. So if we're going to have Penn State or Notre Dame win, it's going to be quite a historic achievement. Let's start with the Orange Bowl, and that's January 9th, 6:30 p.m. on ESPN. Number 6, Penn State. Number 7, Notre Dame. Trey, I know your feelings here. This should be a doubleheader. I tend to agree with you. The corporate overlords at the TV networks disagreed, and so we've got one game on Thursday night, one game on Friday night.
They just don't want me to get any sleep. It's fine. Or get any work done on Friday. It's fine. Well, it's fine.
It's a crusade against productivity on a Friday against the working class people, my column. Trey, I'll pitch it to you first here. With Penn State and Notre Dame, they've been primarily known for their defense this year, but is that what jumps off the page to you when you look at these two teams, or is it something else that is kind of your lead storyline going into the Orange Bowl?
No, it's 100% the defenses, and neither one has really exploded in the offensive standpoint. They're both doing kind of just what they need to do. I talked about it on the quarterfinal recap show, right? You asked me to grade Notre Dame's offensive performance, and they did exactly what they needed to do. They just kind of went up and down the field, got their 3 points when they needed it, and that was more than enough to rely on their defense to only give up 10 points to a backup quarterback in Georgia. This is going to be a situation, I think, where points are going to be at a premium. Both pass rushes have shown to be absolutely elite in the upper tier of the entire country. So I'm really excited to see these defensive linemen get after the quarterback. And yards, points, first downs, everything offensive is going to be at a premium. So every single offensive mistake is going to be magnified. Every single throw that's off by a couple inches that could have been a first down. Every single run that's in a gap that you could have hit where you hit the wrong gap. Going to be magnified because everything's going to be at a premium. And for one, some people think those games are boring. I think those games are really exciting because every single one of those coaching decisions can be overanalyzed. Heck, the defensive mistakes, defenses aren't perfect. If there's a blown coverage, sets somebody up in field goal range, that could be huge for the course of the game. So to me, these games, the stakes are high, of course, with the national semifinal, but every single decision can be analyzed and overanalyzed, and it just makes it way more fun in my mind. So I'm looking forward to a close back and forth game with a couple defenses that are just doing battle out there.
It feels like the details get magnified in those defensive struggles, right? And that's what I think Marcus Freeman did so well against Georgia. Was Georgia had their opportunities not only to put drives together, but to score. And it felt like every single time they came to a crossroads, they had a big play, there was something that called it back, whether it be a penalty, whether it be a dropped first down. Again, the drops for the Georgia offense were just backbreaking. And Notre Dame minded their P's and Q's, and they took every single opportunity to kind of twist the knife against the Bulldogs, even though, I mean, that game finished as a 23-10 final. On the field, it felt like a much larger margin of victory for the Fighting Irish. That final score does not, I think, accurately represent how much I felt like Notre Dame dominated Georgia in that game. Garrett, I'll throw it over to you as well. Neither of these quarterbacks are exactly known for lighting it up, right? Throwing for 350 yards, but both of them are special in each of their ways. Riley Leonard not getting the pro hype that Drew Aller is getting, but both of them have really taken command of the offense and certainly have found a way to score points and kind of dictate the pace of the game in order to get their team over the hump.
Yeah, I think for these quarterbacks, the truth is they're both really good at running their offense, right? You wouldn't get to this point if they didn't know how to run their offense. But they both have done a really good job just kind of embracing that. For Notre Dame, it's a little bit more one-dimensional. They do just kind of run the ball and find ways to run, just kind of go student body left, student body right, find ways to get the ball down the field. Not as prolific passing. Riley Leonard obviously only having 90 yards in the Sugar Bowl. But I think with the Penn State offense kind of on the other side, the way that they kind of get players involved in the pass game, the way they can kind of flare it to the backs, get Tyler Warren in there. I just think Penn State has a little bit more diversity in what their offensive attack is overall. But both of these quarterbacks doing a very good job running their offense. I don't think either of these guys are going to light it up. I think right now, if you had to make me pick which guy do I trust more, I probably lean Drew Aller. And that's kind of a funny thing to say coming into the season. I wouldn't have necessarily told you, yeah, I trust Drew Aller to win a semifinal game to send you to the national championship. But watching what he's done this year, he's been extremely effective. He's found ways to put his players and the guys around him in a position to win. And for me, a lot of this is going to come down to the availability of the pieces around them, right? And it's going to come down to who can put those playmakers around them in that best spot. They both know how to do it. This is going to come down to the supporting casts because these quarterbacks are about as good as you can get right now.
I think that's an interesting point because for Notre Dame, the narrative coming into this season feels very similar to the narrative that I feel like exists around Penn State right now, that the wide receiver core is not a difference maker. The Irish had certainly made strides to improve that. And I think Penn State did as well, right? Bringing in Julian Fleming and the emergence of Tyler Warren. They've both had their moments, but neither team is going to be known for that downfield passing attack, right? A lot of it centers around the trenches, running the football. Now, Trey, it seems simple. We talked about this before Georgia Notre Dame. Stop Riley Leonard, and you can tend to make this offense for the Irish one-dimensional. Jeremiah Love has not been 100% this entire playoff run, and it feels like putting the game exclusively on his shoulders might not be to Notre Dame's favor. And yet the Dogs were not able to do that. It's not like Riley Leonard ran for a bazillion yards, but every time he needed clutch yards, he needed to get a first down, he had 14 carries for 80 yards. So my question for you is, what does Penn State have to do to stop Riley Leonard from running all over them?
It's not going to be the big runs that they have to worry about. You mentioned it's not a high yards per carry situation. It's a volume shooter situation with Riley Leonard running the ball. So they really have to win first and second down, because where Riley Leonard was killing Georgia and killing certain other teams on their schedule this year was in the third and short, right? The third and medium. If it's 3rd and 5 or less, it opens up so many opportunities for Notre Dame. And I'm not saying football rocket science right here, right? It's 3rd and 5 and less is a winning recipe for pretty much any football team, but that it's not, at the risk of oversimplifying it, it's really winning first and second down and forcing them to use Riley Leonard's arm more so than his legs, because it becomes a lot more difficult to do that when you're looking at a 3rd and 9 versus a 3rd and 3. And I know our listeners know that. Again, I'm not trying to oversimplify this or dumb it down, but it's really amazing how simple it becomes from a defensive perspective if you're facing 3rd and 8s more often than you're facing 3rd and 3s. So that's the big key for me.
I'll throw it back to you guys, and Garrett, you can go first here. Biggest advantage either side here for Notre Dame, for Penn State. What sticks out to you is one thing that you feel like the other team just isn't equipped to defend, or gives them the edge here in the semifinal?
I think if you're Notre Dame, your biggest advantage is going to be your mobile quarterback, in addition to your ability to just kind of press coverage. I think it's going to be difficult for Penn State to really do very much in the receiving game in this one. We've seen it all year long with Notre Dame. They just don't give up massive yards in that press coverage. You can kind of pick on a guy every now and then. If you get a guy a little overwhelmed, yeah, there's moments where you can have success, but those are very streaky. It's 1 or 2 drives and then they seal it up. And so, if you're Penn State and you're trying to find ways to win in the passing game, you're going to have to be creative and find a way to not just try to win one-on-one on the outside. I think that's pretty much where Notre Dame has their biggest advantage. For Penn State, it's pass rush, asterisk if Abdul Carter plays. I saw his Twitter. He posted the back to tank shot of Darth Vader, which is just where, if you're not a Star Wars guy, it's where you go get healed. And so he's pretty much just telling me, like, yeah, I'm going to go take a dunk for a week in the healing tank, and we'll see what happens next week. You got to give him his credit. He's absolutely gutting through some of this stuff. But yeah, if he's not 100%, if he can't play, they lose that advantage. Also, shout out one more guy I think is the difference maker for Penn State. It's Tyler Warren. He's about the biggest asterisk to the passing game you can make. Penn State doesn't really have a whole lot of difference makers except for Tyler Warren. He's probably the biggest difference maker on the field, in my opinion, in this game. If he is able to have the type of game we've seen him have through the course of this season, I think Penn State fans are going to be really happy.
For me, the biggest advantage Notre Dame has is getting explosive plays on the ground from their running backs. Jeremiah Love is just a bomb touchdown waiting to happen. And that's no disrespect to Singleton or Katron Allen, because those are obviously a couple 1,000-yard backs that Penn State has. So they have a great stable of running backs in their own right, but the explosive play potential for me in Notre Dame's backfield is just a potential problem for Penn State, because I think that while Penn State can counter that, I just love what Jeremiah Love's been able to do down the stretch of this season, just really putting defenses on their heels. We saw it with a 90-yard touchdown run against Indiana. We saw it a couple times where it looked like he was ready to break one against Georgia. And I think that potential could swing a game that's otherwise very tight in the direction of the Fighting Irish.
It's fun to look at these two teams statistically because they're very similar, right? They both want to run the ball first. Their defenses are both inside the top 10 in almost all the metrics, all the key metrics at least. They both have excellent front sevens that are going to get after you. Boy, you saw that against Boise State and against Georgia, where the offensive lines for the Dogs and the Broncos just couldn't stand up to wave after wave of blitz packages, or just honestly even rushing 4. I mean, Notre Dame, when they strip sacked Gunnar Stockton down near the goal line, I believe that was just a 4-man rush, and RJ Oben was able to bend around the corner and get to the quarterback. So you don't necessarily have to bring a blitz for either of these teams. Both teams are inside the top 10, as I mentioned, in tackles for loss. Getting to the quarterback, Penn State is 4th in tackles for loss. They're 14th in total sacks. Notre Dame's offensive line has only allowed 18 sacks all season long, so that's certainly a matchup that I'm watching. And again, we talked about just how impressive that is for the Fighting Irish, given the fact that they've replaced multiple starters for the entirety of this season. They have literally never once had a healthy offensive line, as fans drew it up in the preseason. So as we turn our attention now to the predictions here, this is the game that I feel like probably only goes one way. And I think it's another rock fight. We had that with Notre Dame and Georgia. Notre Dame pulled away a little bit. Their defense was even more stifling than I anticipated it being against the Bulldogs. But I'm going to go with Notre Dame here to kick us off. And I think I've got Notre Dame 24-21 over Penn State. Both of these teams are at risk of being made one-dimensional. And even though I think the better quarterback is on the side of the Nittany Lions, I think the better collective unit and the better running attack is actually on the side of the Fighting Irish. For whatever reason, I trust Notre Dame's offensive line to get the push up front, to find a way to stop what's been an elite Penn State pass rush and just do enough basically to win this football game. I think I also trust Notre Dame's defense a little bit more. Garrett, you mentioned, and we talked about it, the press man that Notre Dame likes to play. If Notre Dame can take away the run, at least to some degree of effectiveness, they're going to make Drew Aller have to throw into some really tight windows. And outside of Tyler Warren, I don't know that Penn State has a guy that's going to be able to separate and be that X factor deep down the field. So I think this is going to be a beautifully ugly game to watch. I think this is truly going to be which team maybe capitalizes on turnovers, who gets that sack late. But I'm going to roll with the Fighting Irish here. I'll take them 24-21.
I'll take Notre Dame 20-13 range. I don't see that. I don't see this being a high scoring game either. It's going to be a rock fight, fun defensive battle. But for all the reasons you said, I think Notre Dame just has a few more playmakers. I think they have a few more just proven skill sets in these big games this year, quite frankly, because obviously great season for Penn State. Making it to semifinals is nothing to scoff at no matter who you're playing, but Notre Dame has certainly had the tougher road. And getting here to the semifinal, the teams that they've played to get here and beaten to get here are a little bit better, and I trust Notre Dame more. So 20-13 Fighting Irish.
I'm going the other way. I'm going Penn State on this one. I've actually kind of been impressed with what they've done. A couple things on this. They've got 7 turnovers the last couple games versus Notre Dame's got 3. Both teams really do find ways to turn the other team over, but Penn State's been exceptional at it the last couple of games here in the playoffs. I've been really impressed with what they've been able to do on defense, just kind of shutting teams down, bringing that intensity. I do think Abdul Carter, if he can play, is a difference maker in this one. Obviously, that's a big if. But a lot of it for me right now comes down to the fact that I don't really think that Jeremiah Love's going to be a difference maker in this one, and it's because of his health. That knee was on a heavy brace. I think even today in practice when they had media availability, heavy brace, and he was running with second team. That tells me he's probably not feeling his best. If he can go, fantastic. But these have both been 2 fantastic front sevens. And right now, if you're telling me you get kind of a hobbled Jeremiah Love, and you get, Jadarian Price doing his thing, and, Riley Leonard's going to find a way to add to the run game. That's great. But when you tell me that I also get to take Nick Singleton, I get to take Katron Allen, who have both been extremely explosive the last several weeks, and I get to take both of them plus a passing game threat that I don't think realistically Notre Dame has. I understand this press man. I understand that Notre Dame plays great defense. Tyler Warren is a difference maker, and I think he's going to have a couple big catches in this one to move some chains, keep drives going. It's going to be about who gets the turnovers. It's going to be about who can get the other guy to make the mistakes. Right now, I think I trust Penn State to do that. Give me Penn State to win this one. Something ugly, 19-13, something like that. Bunch of field goals in this one.
Someone tell me if that would be scoregami in the postseason for college football. I think one matchup that I'm really excited to watch it, and quite honestly, in such a defensive game, the matchup that this semifinal might come down to is Mike Denbrock against Andy Kotelnicki, the offensive coordinators for these two teams. Both teams are very similar. They want to run the football first, but depending on which offensive coordinator picks his moments to not only take shots down the field, but use motion, use creativity, like the 4th down fire drill, right? If you can find a moment to get that extra 5 yards, to get that extra 10 yards, that could be the difference in one of these games. And whether it's Penn State using Tyler Warren as creatively as they have, Notre Dame finding a way to get the ball into Jordan Faison's hands, Jaden Greathouse using that height down the field in a goal line situation. That's what I think, going to be watching with pen and paper in hand on Thursday night, grading these offensive coordinators, because it's all right in front of you. You know what Notre Dame's going to do. You know what Penn State's going to do defensively. Now, how do you go beat it? I think will ultimately be the determining factor in who wins this game.
One big thing on the run game side of it, though, and I want to make sure that I'm highlighting this too. Notre Dame's beaten some good teams, but not necessarily great running teams, I would say. And this is not to shade Georgia or Indiana. Not a couple of teams I really, when I look at those teams, I think really run the football well. Georgia, we've talked about several times this year, really struggled to run the football. You put that on the flip side, and you watch what Penn State was able to do, shutting down the best running back in college football. And an SMU team that really likes to run the football. They did a really good job against the run there. I think that's going to be a little bit of a prelude to what you'll see with the numbers moving one way or the other. I think Penn State's going to do a better job against the run than Notre Dame will. And I think that probably ends up kind of playing into what you were saying, Mitch, and being able to be creative, be able to dial up a play here or there. I just think a lot of that base offense, I think, probably leans Penn State for me.
Well, we'd love to hear what you guys think at 3Tech Pod. You can write in 3techpod@gmail.com. Let us know your predictions for the Orange Bowl. Make sure you tag us on our social media, and you can write in our YouTube channel as well. Guys, let's move over to the Cotton Bowl. And this is Friday night, January the 10th, number 5, Texas, number 8, Ohio State. Guys, I don't know if you looked at the forecast for North Texas, but meteorologists are calling from anywhere from 5 inches to 13 inches of snow here in the Metroplex. It's giving Green Bay Packer vibes when they won the Super Bowl here in, was that 2011? Whenever that was. One thing that I can guarantee you, the roads will be an absolute mess. So if you're going to the Cotton Bowl, get there like 4 or 5 hours early, because that's what it's going to take to be in attendance for that game. If Penn State and Notre Dame in the Orange Bowl will be known for their defense, at least on the surface, it feels like Texas and Ohio State may be known for their offense. But, Trey, as we talked about in the quarterfinal recap, defense winning a championship is going to be true no matter which one of these 4 teams comes out. In fact, I think if you're looking at which matchup might favor a team the best, Texas would actually like this to be more of a defensive struggle, given some of the, I think, issues maybe they've had closing games out on the offensive side of the ball. So we talked about it with the Orange Bowl. When you look at this game, what's the number one storyline that jumps out to you from Friday night?
I got to see if Texas offense can get it together to the point where they can keep up with what Ohio State's done. That's the biggest question I have. And until I have that answer, it's hard for me to not say I think Ohio State's going to win this one going away, because we've talked about it all season. It feels like that Texas offense is just stuck in second gear, can't find that extra level. And if that's true on Friday night, I think there's going to be a lot of finger pointing and a lot of questions asked of Steve Sarkisian, because that's his side of the ball and that's his baby. And I don't see Ohio State's offense slowing down anytime soon. Texas defense is fantastic. And if they can get pressure on Will Howard, it could be a completely different ball game. But Ohio State looks like a team that has found their groove, and it's going to take an extraordinary effort on both sides of the ball to keep them from moving on. Because, like you mentioned, everybody wants to talk about what Ohio State's offense has done. Their defense has been just as impressive, shutting down 2 really good offenses in Tennessee and Oregon. So if that Texas offense doesn't bring its A game, it's just a matter of time in my mind before the dam starts to break and that Ohio State offense with all those Maseratis starts to break through.
I think what was the key for Ohio State in dominating and shutting down Tennessee and Oregon, as you mentioned, it's taking away the run. It's making the other team one-dimensional through the air, and their pass rush has been getting home. They were absolutely devastating to Dylan Gabriel. They had Nico Iamaleava completely lost in his first road playoff game of his young career, right? And I think we showed those juxtapositions a little bit where you had an experienced quarterback in Dylan Gabriel. We wondered if he was going to be able to handle the situation a little bit better. Obviously wasn't. Ohio State was able to lock down those defenders. So, Garrett, as I throw it over to you, offensively for Texas, Ohio State's going to try and bring pressure with just 4 or 5. So my question for you, what does Texas have to do schematically to move the ball against Ohio State?
Well, they're going to have to do something different than what they've been doing because it just hasn't been working. And specifically in the run game, when I look at the run game specifically, kind of went through some of the numbers just to make sure. Texas only ran the ball for 53 yards against Arizona State. Go flip that over and look at what Ohio State just did to Oregon. That was 23 yards for the Ducks in that game. So if you want to see something similar to the Rose Bowl, don't run the football, right? If Texas can't run the football, we're going to go see this whole thing explode just like it did. I think a lot of it's going to come down to just finding ways in the general, just kind of flow of the game to just put together more sustained drives, right? Take what's being given to you. Don't try to go for the big thing. Don't overthink it. Run the football when you need to. If you got to move the pocket a little bit, if you got to put this on more of a stretch play, get this to the outside, like whatever you got to do, find ways to run the football, find ways to set up that play action, because that's where Texas has been successful offensively. When you put the whole thing on Quinn's shoulders, it doesn't look that good. He needs a balanced attack in that run to be able to succeed. And so for me, Texas has to find a way to run the football. I don't care how many people they're bringing, how many people they put in the box. You don't want to just try to get this thing into one-on-ones because Ohio State will be, I think, the best defense they've played all year, and I don't think it's particularly close in that regard. Ohio State might have the best defense in the country, and I think that when you really try to break this one down, it's setting up the run game so that you can hit stuff down the field. If they're going to try to just hope that they can get their receivers wide open in space and just outrun people like they've been doing, it ain't gonna happen, right? If you look at what they've been doing and how they scored early against Arizona State, it was hitting guys in space. It was, off to the races. That's not gonna happen against Ohio State. They have athletes to keep up with that in that back half. And so you're gonna have to find a way to run a much more balanced attack if you're Texas, because you just don't have the same talent advantage you've had over several teams this year.
Buckeyes have the 5th ranked rushing defense in the country. No doubt the running game is going to be important for Texas. Trey, we saw Chip Kelly basically pitch a perfect game against Oregon. The motion, the way that he schemed guys open, Jeremiah Smith first and foremost in that group, and the way that he protected Will Howard and gave him a pocket to comfortably throw down the field was nothing short of impressive. Apply that to Texas and Steve Sarkisian, because we have been talking about this offense playing with its food and not knowing how to put a game away. And, Arizona State was the better team, quite frankly, in the second half of that Peach Bowl against the Longhorns. So what do you see that Steve Sarkisian needs to do more consistently? What weapons does he need to be utilizing to beat the Buckeyes on Friday night?
That's the age-old question, because it feels like he has the horses, right? It feels like he's just not pushing the right buttons, whether that's leaning on the quarterback too much to make throws, whether that's running the same. I saw a lot of Texas fans online complaining that the run concepts were just the same thing over and over again against Arizona State, and that eventually got snuffed out by the Sun Devils. He has a lot of talent to work with, and I don't know. I wish I could answer that question for you, because it seems like all the pieces are there. I don't think the solution is chucking it deep. I think it's working the intermediate game, like Garrett mentioned, working in the play action a bunch as well. But it's balancing enough, just relying on your athletes to go make a play versus getting in a very aggressive Ohio State defense looking in the wrong spot. He's got to find a way to find balance of those two things and scheme his players open, because a lot of the Texas offense is going east-west, is relying on your opponent to miss a tackle. And that can sometimes work consistently when you are out-talenting teams. But when you have a good tackling team, like I think Ohio State is, like Arizona State was, it can get you in trouble. It can get you behind the sticks where you're having to rely on deeper passes. So balancing the misdirection, balancing the sleight of hand situation with just relying on your playmakers to go make a play and not trying to get too cute, not doing something where if you need 3 points, you're calling 3 pass plays out of a 2-minute timeout. There's just too many of those head-scratching decisions this year that you've got to cut back on if you want to lead your team to a victory in this situation.
I think we've got to see Ryan Wingo come to the party here against Ohio State, right? I mean, the Buckeyes are going to roll 3-4 elite pass catchers out there. If you throw G. Scott, the tight end, in there, Texas obviously has Matthew Golden. He was the difference for the Longhorns against Arizona State. You've got Gunnar Helm. You're going to need somebody else to step up. And I think Ryan Wingo is a perfect example of just that pure athleticism and speed. We've seen him be big for the Longhorns at moments this year, but hadn't really done a ton in the playoffs so far. 2 catches against Clemson, 3 catches against Arizona State, I believe, if I'm reading my notes right. So whether it's him, DeAndre Moore, but you're going to need somebody else to threaten the Buckeyes, and I think threaten them down the field, if nothing else, to create space, to make those safeties respect the deep ball, especially if you're not able to run it as efficiently as we've seen the Longhorns do, right? I mean, even into the Clemson game, they were rolling over folks. And it really felt like their bread and butter had become that running game with Wisner and with Jaden Blue. Arizona State took that away a little bit, right? And if they can't get back to that against Ohio State, that's when I think that the Buckeyes are going to pin their ears back and really come after Quinn Ewers. Now, credit to Quinn. He made some big throws when he absolutely had to. I mean, that adjustment that he made at the line of scrimmage on 4th and 13 to check into extra blockers and block the cover 0 from the Sun Devils, that's what Quinn's going to have to do pretty regularly against this Buckeyes defense. We know Jim Knowles likes to bring blitzes. He likes to disguise his looks. This is going to be the biggest test for Quinn Ewers. So anything else that kind of pops to your mind as far as storylines before we get to predictions? I mean, I guess it's worth mentioning this is technically Quinn playing against his old team, although I don't really know that taking COM 101 and spending a semester there counts as a former team necessarily. But, you know, people have tried to make that something. Do you think that's a storyline at all?
They signed a paycheck or two for him. I mean, I think fondly of my first job at the movie theater in my hometown. It's great. Every time I drive past it, I say, hey, I worked there for a couple summers. So that's great. But for Texas, it's always it feel like a broken record. It's going to be turnovers and converting red zone opportunities into touchdowns. If Texas is able to do that, they have a chance to move on to the national championship game. If they play like they have in those spots when the game's on the line and when it's possible to have when everything's going right and you just need to not turn the ball over, don't turn the ball over. That's the biggest thing for Texas that I could give a piece of advice to, because it just seems like that's what's holding them back. Now, Ohio State is not as turnover happy as the Clemson and Arizona State defenses that they have been playing. So might be a little bit. They're definitely a great pass rushing team. They're one of the, if I don't know if they're still considered the top defense in the country stat wise, but they're top 5 defensively stat wise. So obviously not an easier defense to play against, but maybe a little bit less aggressive when it comes to turnovers. So maybe that can tilt things in Texas' favor just a bit, but don't turn the ball over and convert your red zone opportunities to 6 instead of 3. And you're looking at a way better chance for the Longhorns.
All right, Garrett, I'll give you the first word here. Texas, Ohio State, pick the winner.
Look, well, there's certainly a lot of reasons for people to say that I hate both of these teams. Most of those people would be right. No, I don't really have any specific animus, towards either of these teams. I know that I got a Michigan shirt hanging up in the background along with a little bit of A&M gear, but don't necessarily have any specific hate for these teams. But right now, I don't see how you can pick against Ohio State. Ohio State's looked like the best team in the country since they started their playoff run. Unless Texas brought with them a couple of, maize and blue uniforms to trot out there against Ohio State, I just don't see a way that they can honestly keep up with them. I think that Texas is going to have massive flashes, right? They're going to have these big moments. They're going to hit a couple of big plays, and they're going to have some big moments. They're going to score. This is probably going to start with a lot of fireworks, but I just think that watching what Ohio State just did to Oregon and what they were able to do against Tennessee, watching how effective their offense has been, watching how good Will Howard has been as a quarterback these last couple of weeks. And I think nothing can portray that any better than the throw that he made to Ibuka, which was very well covered. I mean, extremely well covered. And he just put that thing on a rope, dropped that thing in there. And I just don't see a way that Texas has the ability to keep up with that. No matter whether or not you see good defensive moments for either team, big plays from either team, I just trust Ohio State to make those big plays. I think a handful more times than I trust Texas to do that. If Texas lapses in the secondary, we saw what happened, right? Everyone liked to highlight that big play. I think it was the second one to Jeremiah Smith last week where they just dropped the coverage. Safety didn't go with them. He's wide open. Ohio State can do that to you in a hurry. I trust Ohio State's secondary more than I trust Texas secondary, and I'm going to pick Ohio State to win this one by a couple of scores. Give me something like 38-24 Ohio State.
My thought was 34-20 Ohio State. I think it's going to be a couple score victory. I'm right there with you, Garrett. I just trust Ohio State more right now. They've shown me way more in the playoff on both sides of the ball than Texas has. And I just don't trust, even if Texas has a lead in the second half, I just don't trust them to put a game away against an equal or more talented team than they are. So I'm going to take Ohio State to win this one 34-20.
I think this game for me, similar to the offensive coordinator battle that I'm watching in the Orange Bowl, I think this game boils down to how effective the secondary is for both teams. And you guys have kind of teed that up, right? Ohio State's the top ranked secondary in the country. They're giving up just barely over 152 yards through the air a game. That's it. Texas, though, is number 3 in the country. They're giving up just a shade over $166 through the air. So a negligible difference there, right? One thing that I am looking at is the turnover discrepancy in the secondaries. Ohio State's only forced 9 interceptions this year. Texas has forced 21. Now, we've talked about Will Howard and the growth that he's had, his efficiency when he's protected. This front 7 from Texas, especially the edge rushers, they've been terrors this season, right? And they made Sam Leavitt run for his absolute life in that quarterfinal matchup. If Ohio State's offensive line can hold up, then great. I think Ohio State absolutely runs away with this. But if Texas can force Howard to make some mistakes, if they can force him into happy feet, we've seen he's a completely different quarterback, right? The film just doesn't lie. So I think this game maybe for me tends to be a little bit closer. But all of that being said, I do trust Ohio State's offense more than I trust Texas's offense to get this done. So I'm going to go with the Buckeyes 35-21 over the Texas Longhorns, moving on to the national championship. It's Ohio State, that's Notre Dame, that's a Rust Belt matchup for you, for everyone that's complained about the SEC dominating championships over the last few years.
Pray for your SEC friends. It's Ohio State versus, if Ohio State wins, pray for your SEC friends. Because
it's the Marcus Freeman Bowl.
If
we
it's
get Ohio State, Notre Dame.
Penn State, that's where you really need to worry about it, because the last thing that SEC fans need, I'm looking at, some of these media guys down here too. The last thing SEC guys need is a rematch of a Big Ten matchup. And then to go play that thing, in Atlanta? That would be, spit in your eye, right?
So that's actually a good question. If it is Ohio State, Penn State, is that setting up to be the most boring national championship since Alabama, LSU, and what was it, 2009?
I think it is. Unless Texas wins, I think this is going to be one of the most boring national championships. You could say Georgia, TCU, obviously. I think Ohio State's going to smoke whoever they play out of Notre Dame, Penn State. I just don't think it's close. I think Texas has enough weaknesses overall that, Notre Dame or Penn State could make a game out of it if Texas were to advance. I just don't see a way that Ohio State doesn't smoke the rest of the field on the way out.
So are you saying that the winner of the Cotton Bowl is your this is the de facto national championship?
I would say outside of some kind of weird injury situation, I might be able to make a case that if it were Texas advancing, that their lack of ability to run the football plus either of Notre Dame and Penn State's run game and, their run defense, maybe I could make a case somewhere in there. But I think I'd pick either Texas or Ohio State to beat either of those two teams.
Yeah. Trey, nod your head.
There's a lot of discourse about that online right now. I
Lean into it. Add to the discourse.
I'm of the opinion that Notre Dame, Ohio State would be a fun game. I don't know that the final score would necessarily be indicative if you just look at the box score, and I don't think you'd say that, that was an all-time classic by any stretch of the imagination after that game. But I think Ohio State and Notre Dame, I think Notre Dame's defense and maybe ability to play ball control a little bit could keep that game competitive and where we're not just starting the live stream in the middle of the third quarter like we were with that Georgia TCU game a couple of years ago.
It was
But
an early night.
I am also of the opinion that I think the winner of the Cotton Bowl will go on to win the national championship. Yes.
I think
I just
the
don't
most
see how you don't pick that as Ohio State. Though, like Ohio State's been head and shoulders better than everybody else. That's not named
eyeball
Michigan.
tests in the playoff. It's hard to bet any money on anybody other than Ohio State unless you're just taking a long shot, wild ass guess.
And we said this going into the playoff, but we said this was massive for Ryan Day and his ability to keep his job. And we were saying, is anything short of winning the championship going to help him keep his job, keep good graces, get him off the hot seat, however you wanted to phrase it? But after that loss to Michigan, Ohio State fans were in the absolute dumps. And then since then, they've just kind of, like I said, they smoked everybody they played since then. It hasn't been close for a second, really. Like, I haven't really watching all of these teams play so far. There have been moments where I've thought, like, oh, that team looks a little susceptible, or like, oh, we might have a game here. Except Ohio State. Ohio State's looked like a purely perfect football team so far in the playoffs. And I don't see that changing. I think they're highly motivated. You can clearly see a team that's locked in. That defense is playing fantastic. And kind of what you were saying, Trey, you could see Ohio State Notre Dame being a fun game. I had fun watching the Rose Bowl, and it's not because it was close. It was because I kept saying, like, every 3 seconds, no way, no shot. And it was because they had scored like 30 points on 10 plays or something like that. They barely touched the football. They're just slinging it. I think we're kind of in store for that to be the rest of the story, and good for them.
I think that I think that Ryan Day has saved his job at this point, and I wasn't necessarily of that mind when they lost to Michigan. Administration was saying, listen, Ohio State's fan base is well documented as one of the most psychotic fan bases in the country. I'm not saying anything that we don't already know, right? And Ohio State fans, let's look in the mirror, right? I mean, I don't think you're going to disagree with me all that much.
They're super passionate, but yeah, they're crazy.
But the way that Ryan Day has dominated at home, winning that game over Tennessee, when just about everybody was picking the Volunteers to make it Neyland North, right? And go in and upset Ohio State, and in Ryan Day's tenure, smash the Vols. Oregon, the most complete team in the country. It's the Rose Bowl. Of course, Oregon's going to win this. Dan Lanning's a defensive genius. Smashed Oregon. He's done enough to save his job and restore, at least in my mind, the faith that Ohio State can win a championship. Now, still got to do it. Still got 2 games left to go, right? If he's going to reach that mountaintop. But for me, I think all the doubts that Ryan Day, the moment is too big and he doesn't actually know how to handle success. I think all of that, for me, I'm throwing out the back window. He's got to go beat Texas, but I think he's in a great spot to go do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're just the most complete team in the country. I don't see a flaw with Ohio State right now where I just say, like, oh, that's going to be where they get exploited. And I'm not just saying that for Texas. I'm saying put pretty much anyone across from them. And again, I have no idea what their problem is with Michigan. Like, I was sitting here, about to say, like, well, does Texas have plans to bring in Davis Warren to quarterback? I have no idea what the problem is with the Michigan issue, but, like, I mean, try to point to where they have an issue. Their quarterback can sling it. They got receivers out the wazoo. They got a good tight end. They got 2 running backs who can absolutely get it done. Their offensive line, consistent, plays well. Like, again, outside of that Michigan game, that offensive line has been dominant. The defense has been rock solid. What's wrong with Ohio State? Like, where's the problem for Ohio State that you say, like, oh, this is the exploitation point. This is where you can really get them.
It would have been the offensive line, but as Mitch said on the quarterfinal recap, they finally had a chance to gel. And I think that's the biggest thing is those guys have had a chance to play in their positions, and they're figuring it out. And Texas defensive line is going to be an absolute force in this game. I don't know if we said enough about that in the Cotton Bowl portion of this episode. Texas defensive line is going to be an absolute force, and it's going to be a big test for this Ohio State offensive line. We said the same thing about Tennessee, and we said the same thing about Oregon, and they rose to the occasion in those moments. So it's really, I've never seen anything like it, guys. I've never seen a team look so down. And maybe we'll see this more in the expanded playoff era because there really wasn't an opportunity for it in the 14 playoff era. If you lost towards the end of the season, your season was effectively over. You're playing in the Citrus Bowl or something like that instead of the playoff. And maybe we'll see this more often where a team takes a weird late season loss, doesn't look like themselves, and then they just find a way in that layoff period to figure something out. Maybe we'll see that more often, like Ohio State. But this is what we were expecting from Ohio State in August and July in preview season. This is why I can't remember exactly. Like, I think I picked Ohio State to win it all, maybe. I can't remember.
I think I did. Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, like at least I think multiple of us did. I can't even remember. We'll have to go look it up. I might be taking credit for something I definitely didn't do, and apologies for that. But this is what we all expected them to look like in July, and they're finally. It's much better. Obviously, Ohio State fans would much rather find a way to beat Michigan at some point. But if you gave them the choice, I'm sure 9 out of 10 of them would say, yeah, I'd much rather be playing like this in December and January than the last week of November.
Certainly at this point right now, being able to look back, that Michigan loss is starting to sting just maybe a little bit less. I think time certainly heals all wounds, and so does bludgeoning two blue blood programs.
Although I will say I am excited for if Ohio State can pull it off, and let's say that they just smoke everyone on the way out of the season, they win the national championship. It was never close. I'm so excited for the off-season discourse coming out of Ann Arbor, just being like, hey, we're still here. Like, did you forget your side quest? What happened? You know, I'm so excited to see what that looks like between those two schools. We won the championship, and Michigan's just like, yes, scoreboard. Yeah. I'm just so excited for that.
I mentioned I've never seen a team turn it around like this. I've also never seen just something that seems so psychological at this point with Ohio State and Michigan, because much has been made about that. This is an off-season topic that we can get into if Ohio State does win it all. But it does seem just psychological, doesn't it? It seems like they just wanted to prove that they could beat Michigan at Michigan's brand of football instead of just playing their own brand of football. And it's weird. It didn't work. But again, if you polled Ohio State fans, I'm sure 9 out of 10 of them would say, yep, this is worth it. I wouldn't trade the results for anything.
Well, and I think along with the psychological element, I think one on-field X's and O's that I can point to is the defensive line play. And Trey, you mentioned it. This Texas defensive line, in my opinion, is probably, at least on the edge, they're going to be better than Michigan. On the interior, I think the Wolverines still have the edge. But as a unit, this defensive line is as good, if not better, than what Michigan threw at them in the big game, right? If Texas can duplicate that template for success, which is stopping the run and getting to Will Howard and just being able to lock down enough in the secondary, third pass defense in the country, that's the recipe to success for Texas. Going all the way back to how I opened the Cotton Bowl preview, Texas actually kind of needs this to be a rock fight. If they can eliminate Ohio State's ability to get big chunk plays at will, that's how I think the Longhorns win this. If they can turn this into a fight in a phone booth, I think that's how the Longhorns get to the national championship. It's a true case of Jekyll and Hyde, though, because Ohio State at times when we were counting them out looked like the offense was beyond broken and irreparable this side of the national championship, right? It was going to take something in the offseason, a true come to Jesus moment to fix what was going on in Columbus. But they have turned it around. And suddenly this is a brand new football team. And so I think whichever Ohio State team obviously shows up at the Cotton Bowl will go a long way to determine if Texas's front seven is able to affect this game enough for them to win. So again, we'd love to hear from you at 3TechPod. You can comment below on our social posts, or you can write in on YouTube, or write in through the email as well at 3techpod or 3techpod@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. Fellas, I'm excited. We may be snowed in here in North Texas. Trey, I don't know if the snow is going to make it all the way down to you, but I think
there's a chance, actually. What I looked this afternoon, there's a chance. It's not going to be 15 inches like you guys might get, but we might.
When there's a chance that it's hitting down where Trey lives, Mitch, we might be toast.
We very well might.
Part 2 might be incoming very soon.
I'll get the sleds out. We can go make a day out of it. Okay. We'll go some fun.
The biggest question from this weekend is ERCOT actually ready to do their job?
That's not a huge question. The answer is obviously no.
I don't like the odds on that.
Do I trust Texas to beat Ohio State, or do I trust ERCOT to keep the state of Texas running? Hook 'em. I don't know. That's
probably a pretty smart bet. We'll be talking to you guys, the Jimmies and the Joes, all throughout the game over on our social channels. So we'd invite you to join us there. We'll pass along when we're going to do the live show. I bet it will be either Friday night or sometime early Saturday as we break down both of these games and get you ready for the national championship. But an exciting weekend ahead. We're excited to watch it with you, and we'd love to have you followed, subscribed wherever you already aren't in order to be part of that ride. For Trey Reeves and Garrett Turney, I'm Mitch Mason. Until next time, so long, everybody.
Gracious. Yep.